And now we've come to the last of what I call the Caesar trilogy of Planet of the Apes movies. We've had Rise, we had Dawn, and now we've come to the War. War for the Planet of the Apes. Now, War for the Planet of the Apes is the third of the most recent Planet of the Apes movies starring Andy Serkis as Caesar, and this is the concluding chapter of Caesar's journey. And this movie, right from the get-go, has a certain vibe of finality to it. And I don't know about you, but there's always something about the concluding chapter, the final chapter, that to me always puts the movie at a disadvantage, just because of the fact that this is going to be the last one. Now, we know that obviously studio mandates and all that make it probable even at the time that this is not going to be the last one, and we know that now it definitely isn't. But at the very least, this is the final chapter of Caesar's journey. And the reason I say it's a disadvantage is because with something like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, there were so many directions it could go. It's the middle chapter. You don't really know what's going to happen. There's a lot of surprises, twists and turns, new concepts, new developments with the civilization. But with this one, you know right from the get-go, because it's a concluding chapter, what's going to go down. You know that Caesar is going to have a very important internal conflict that he's going to have to get over. You know that the bad guy is going to threaten the entire existence of apes, and you know that by the end of the movie, Caesar's either going to have to make some kind of sacrifice or be killed in action, ending up with him dead by the end of the movie. And I don't think that's a spoiler to say right out the gate, because you know how these third chapters tend to go. It's the same thing with The Dark Knight Rises, same thing with Return of the Jedi. You know how these tend to play out. And because of that, I can't help but feel like this movie is probably the most boring of all of them, even though pacing-wise and storytelling-wise, this movie is firing on all cylinders. Just like the other two movies, fantastic acting, fantastic writing. I would say it's right up there with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes from a writing perspective and character perspective. We get a lot more of the ape civilization. The apes are getting even smarter. They're talking more. The children of Caesar are also talking. Children of other apes are starting to learn how to talk. Most of the higher up apes like Maurice and Rocket are starting to talk a lot more. And that's where this movie, like all the other movies, really shined, is showing that ape civilization. It's endlessly fascinating, and I think that's really why they keep making these movies, because there's just something inherently cool about ape civilization, and I feel like I've talked about it in every one of my videos, and it's definitely here. Although we don't really see that much of it here after the first, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes or so, because this is War for the Planet of the Apes. There's a war going on, and if you remember how the last movie ended, the military was coming in to wipe out all these apes, and the war is on. And here, it doesn't do what you might expect this movie to do, being titled War for the Planet of the Apes. This isn't the start of the war. It's not any really big battle for the Planet of the Apes, which that's its own movie. No, the feeling you get in this movie is that, well, it's 15 years after Rise of the Planet of the Apes. So it's been some time since Caesar and his apes have started this colony, started developing their own little civilization. 15 years after that pandemic that wiped out most of humanity. And I don't remember off the top of my head how many years after Dawn of the Planet of the Apes this is, but you get the feeling that it's been a few years. This war is anything but new. Everyone's kind of settled into their own camps. Sure, there's still fighting here and there, but for the most part, things have kind of died down, but I wouldn't exactly call it peace. But things start to heat up again when we're introduced to the Colonel. And the Colonel, played by Woody Harrelson, is just a very intense person in general. He's pretty far removed in personality from Gary Oldman's character in the previous movie, where he was really trying to figure out some kind of peaceful solution. He was trying to work with the apes. No, the Colonel in this movie is out for blood. He's committed to the cause. He believes that if the humans lose this war, the planet will be a planet of apes. And with that conviction, his number one mission is to get rid of Caesar. If they can kill Caesar, if they can kill his bloodline, then humans stand a chance and we can go back to the way things work. So because of that, it's not too long into the movie where we get a sneak attack into Caesar's home, and Caesar's bedroom gets attacked by these soldiers in this stealth mission. His wife dies, his son dies, but that is still a direct assault on Caesar's home, and he's not going to take that lying down. So because of this, one, he knows that their little secluded base camp is no longer secure, and he knows through some scouting missions that there are safer places towards the southeast, across the desert. So him and Maurice and all the other elder apes hatch this plan to do an ape exodus, where they're going to leave. They're not going to fight this war anymore. They're just going to relocate, where the humans aren't as organized and militarized as they are right now. But then there was that whole issue of they came into Caesar's home and killed his family. And when all the other apes are leaving, Caesar stays behind, and he's going to do a one-man war against this colonel and get his revenge. And you could really tell in Caesar's appearance and attitude that he is reaching the end of his life. His political career, his legacy is no longer his alone, and he's starting to feel like a relic in his own civilization. So he's thinking, I'm going to have one last guns blazing attack on this colonel, and that's going to be my swan song. The apes will love me for that, and then maybe the civilization can prosper. But things get a little bit more complicated when Maurice and Rocket, who have had his back throughout this entire franchise, they stay behind as well, are his traveling companions. They're willing to go and die for Caesar for the sake of the mission. And it's around this time when I realized this movie really isn't a war movie in the same vein as something like Saving Private Ryan or Hacksaw Ridge or Platoon, where it really shows the brutality and endless violence of war and the suffering. That's not really what this is. This is a war movie in more of the same way something like Schindler's List is a war movie. And I say that not so that you would start drawing comparisons of like the Holocaust and all that, but more in that it doesn't show the battles and the fighting nearly as much as the encampments and the suffering of civilians and just the way society is kind of crumbling in because of the war and how people are just constantly mistreating each other. That's more of what I mean when I bring up the comparison, because there isn't a lot of fighting in this movie, really. It's Caesar and his companions traveling across country. They pick up this one mute girl who gets the name Nova, which, okay, that was a reference to the original Planet of the Apes. But this phenomenon of humans becoming mute all of a sudden is a new phenomenon in this trilogy, because while that was a big deal in the original Planet of the Apes, that humans had de-evolved to the point where they don't even speak, they're just these primitive creatures, that didn't really come up in the first two movies because, well, how would that even make sense? I feel like that would be something that would evolve much later. But now we're 15 years out, and the way they explain it here is actually pretty clever. They explain it as a side effect of the simian flu, that the people that have survived that pandemic had some kind of natural immunity to it, but the disease still lives on inside of them. And a side effect of that is an unfortunate loss of speech. Now we have this mute girl growing up, she can't speak, so now she is a symbol of what the human race could become in a generation or two. And that concept is a terrifying one to the Colonel, because he knows about this. He knows about the whole simian flu side effect and the potential of everyone becoming mute, and he does not want that to happen. That's one of the reasons why he feels like there's such a time crunch to get these apes out of the picture, because ultimately it's his own mortality, his own higher brain function that is on the line, and those of his descendants. And I gotta say, that concept alone is something that does elevate this movie to the level of the other two movies, because honestly, when this movie first came out, I was just thinking, based off of the promotional material, that this is just going to be another kind of battle for the Planet of the Apes where, yeah, humans are still around, but they're not nearly what they used to be, and the apes have kind of already taken over. They're just going to be this kind of redundant ape movie. I didn't really know if there was anything original that they were going to bring into this telling of that. I gotta say, the threat of humans losing their ability to speak and their higher brain function becoming more primitive is a really cool idea, and it's developed really well here. But then the movie kind of takes a turn when Caesar and his companions get captured by the humans, and they realize that there's this whole ape POW camp, for lack of a better word. All the casualties and all the captured apes throughout the 10 years or so of this war going on have just been accumulating in these cages. So now the movie, from here to really the end of the movie, is just a prison break movie with Caesar. And I didn't really appreciate that parallel when I was watching the movie, but thinking back on it, it is kind of clever how in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, the whole crux of the revolution was based on Caesar getting them to have their own colony in the Redwoods by the end of the movie. And here, Caesar is in another position towards the end of his life to inspire a similar revolution in this POW camp. And that's ultimately what he does. The only difference is Caesar is so much older and more world weary, where he really doesn't have the fight in him as much as he used to. He's kind of at the end of his rope. He's kind of beaten down. When they have him stretched out on that X-shaped cross thing that looks an awful lot like the scarecrows from the original Planet of the Apes, which I'm sure that was a reference to, he really doesn't fight back like you would think Caesar would in the previous movies. He just kind of takes it and he kind of lays low for a long time. But in true Caesar fashion, he's not really laying low. He's laying the groundwork for the revolution that's going to happen. But this movie is called War for the Planet of the Apes, so there is quite a bit of really cool action that goes down in this movie. And when the apes do break out and they revolt against the colonel and the humans, it is really exciting to watch, and it's good ape action, kind of reminiscent of the previous movie. Although there isn't any moment that I can think of that's nearly as cool or memorable as when Colby was taking out the tank, or when Colby had the dual machine guns. But I will say, after a lot of the chaos has already erupted, this movie has a very strong final act. And I would say the final act really starts when the colonel has his last stand, when him and Caesar are face to face, and you think that they're about to fight, but there really isn't much of a fight because the colonel is starting to decline. He's starting to lose his intelligence, and he's starting to lose his speech, and that is terrifying. You can see it in his eyes that he wants Caesar to kill him, and Caesar doesn't do it. He thinks the best way for him to get his revenge, and for what's best with all the apes, is just to let him de-evolve and live with the shame and guilt of becoming what he was fighting against for God knows how many years. Because also something I forgot to mention is that even within the human encampment, those who started exhibiting the side effects, the loss of speech, the loss of cognitive ability, he's just been executing them and leaving them to rot in the snow. And only the people that are fully human as he sees it are fit to live and carry on their genes for the next generation. So when Caesar decides, no, I'm not going to kill you, I'm going to let you live and suffer, he turns the gun on himself and dies. But as you might suspect, Caesar doesn't quite get away scot-free. He gets shot in the side. It seems like a pretty bad wound, but it doesn't seem quite fatal until what I'm pretty sure is the final shot of the movie, where Caesar and Maurice and everyone else are leaving. They're going to greener pastures. They're under this big tree. It's a beautifully composed shot. Probably 90 to 100% of it is CGI, but it still looks beautiful. And you just see Caesar kind of slump over and collapse and die. And all the apes mourn him. It's a very somber moment because their leader, their savior, Caesar, who brought them through so much turmoil, developed their society, taught them how to speak, how to write, all this stuff, is now dead. And the apes are just going to have to move on. And that's War for the Planet of the Apes. And despite what the title might suggest, this movie is not wall-to-wall action, wall-to-wall violence. It's a very cerebral movie, like how the previous two weren't wall-to-wall action. There was unpacking who Caesar is, ape philosophy, ape civilization, what it looks like when apes continue to increase in intelligence while humans continually suffer from the pandemic that wiped out most of their people, the loss of power and infrastructure, and now the loss of speech and cognitive ability. That dynamic between the humans and the apes is what carries this franchise, even more so than Andy Serkis' brilliant performance and all the other motion capture actors that just brings so much to the personality of these apes. It really is the human-ape dynamics that get us to watch and rewatch these movies over and over again. And this movie doesn't disappoint. There are some great ideas about what it means to be human and what it means to be a good person in the face of Armageddon. And while I do like Dawn of the Planet of the Apes more because it doesn't really have a clear villain, I think it works well enough for the movie that they're telling, and it's still a really good apes movie. It's a great character study of Caesar, probably more than any of the other movies. This one definitely feels like it's focused the most on the character of Caesar and what kind of a legacy Caesar wants to leave behind. I still think it's fantastic and a great closing chapter to this Apes Trilogy. It's actually kind of rare nowadays to get a trilogy where all three movies are great in their own right. Sure, everyone's going to have their favorite, but Rise, Dawn, and War are all fantastic ape movies that all raise the bar for what a Planet of the Apes movie could be. Now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about War for the Planet of the Apes? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.